plans are also gender blind, actually, so far. And the defense for that has always been lack of disaggregated data. The intentions are there for addressing gender needs in disaster and climate actions, like Sendai framework talks about women and youth leadership, women's livelihoods, women and most vulnerable people's participation into policy making. UNFCCC has in the 2019 COP has, adopted, not adopted, I keep, yes, almost put out the gender action plan. But when it comes to tracking progress of all these intentions and the work plans and Sendai implementation, for instance, there is no indicator against which nations would need to report and therefore would need to work on. So there has been a growing demand for disaggregated data within the climate change and disaster risk reduction community. But the work towards that hasn't been that significant till date. So against such backdrop, we are having this event today, where we'll have presentations on the issue from some of the finest experts in this field with great experiences. And the event is chaired by the Secretary of the Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, Mr. Mohsin. And we are really grateful to him that amidst his very tight schedule, he has agreed to be part of this program. A quick housekeeping advice: participants are not currently allowed to speak. However, you can put in your comments, questions in chat box, and after the presentations, we'll try to get those questions to the panelists for their response. And we'll also have open floor for discussion and questions to panelists. So now I'll invite the first panelist, Ms. Jessica Gardner. She's an expert on gender statistics and data analysis with over 25 years of experience in development, economy, and environment. She has worked in countries across Asia and the Pacific, Europe and Africa, providing technical assistance to strengthen statistics and align with international standards. She helped Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics to develop a unique document together with UN Women's support in the region, actually. This is a unique document for the region, if not globally, a protocol and guideline for sex and age disaggregated data. So over to Jessica. Jessica, have you started presenting? Because we can't hear you.
Sorry, classic error. I didn't unmute myself, but you should see my screen, I hope. So thank you so much, Dilruba, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be joining you for this conference today and presenting this work that's been conducted in Bangladesh and 2 other countries in the Asia Pacific region and regionally. So let me begin. We know the essential nature of monitoring climate change and disasters across the world, but especially in the Asia Pacific region. In 2018, almost half of the natural disasters that occurred worldwide in that year occurred in Asia Pacific, and more than half of global deaths from disasters since 1970 have been people of Asia and the Pacific. And there's also a huge economic impact, as well as the tragic loss of life and impact on individuals. Countries face huge loss, and that has been estimated potentially at reaching something like 11% of GDP by 2100. So it's a massively important issue. And we know that women and men and groups within women and men, such as older, younger, people with a disability, people in rural versus urban areas, we know that people have different experiences and different roles to play when it comes to managing natural resources. And so the impacts of climate change and disaster do differ between groups, and that is why we need to have good data that's disaggregated by sex, by age, by location, by disability status, as many characteristics as practical, that to give us a real clear picture of who is being impacted and how. I wanted to start with clarifying that as a statistician working with official statistics, working with the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics in this example to support the production of data, my work is mainly at this bottom of the pyramid, producing quantitative data, numbers, counting things, turning those numbers into averages and percentages and ratios and rates. And so we know statistics can tell us so much. For example, globally, about 1/4 of national parliamentarians are women. And if we look in the sector of climate change and the heads of delegation at the COP meetings, about 1/4 of heads of delegation are women. So this is just one example of a gender statistic that shows where there's some inequality between women and men, and highlight some areas if we want to get representation of both women and men, that we have some further work to do. But qualitative information is also incredibly important, and it's the combination of both the numbers and the story behind those numbers that really allows us to turn data into information that then, of course, can go up the pyramid and become knowledge and wisdom that can be used for action and to have an effect on reducing inequalities. So an empirical study was done quite some time ago now, but it shows that women and children are 14 times more likely to die or be injured in a disaster than men. And for example, after the 2010 Pakistan floods, women and children made up nearly 70% of the nearly 18 million people that were affected by that disaster. And going back to the cyclone in 1991 in Bangladesh, 90% of the deaths were women and children. Now, as Dilruba mentioned in her introduction, we don't have a lot of data like this because of the challenges that we face in collecting disaggregated data around disasters and around the elements of climate change. So this is really an area we need to do more work to fill this data gap so we can track the impact on women and men and children. There is a very increasing demand for data in this space. And whenever you look at filling a data gap, the first step is to be clear on where does the demand for that data come from. So a beginning point is to look to those global mandates and national mandates, national policies, and to see what they say about the indicators that should be produced and the data that are needed. And when it comes to gender and climate change, gender and the environment, there's a number of frameworks that provide a good starting point. The Sustainable Development Goals, clearly one. Also work that's been done globally and regionally to develop indicators about gender, looking at what they say about the environment, about climate change, and instruments like the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination, all forms of discrimination against women, CEDAW. That framework calls for a lot of disaggregated data. It's not specific about indicators per se, but it certainly makes a very clear case for the demand for data in this area. And the UNFCCC does have an action plan and aspirations to increase the data, the production and the use of sex disaggregated and gender sensitive data. So there's a lot of demand. And that is really was the starting point for our work in Bangladesh to identify what has Bangladesh committed to measuring when it comes to gender dimensions of disasters and climate change. So all these frameworks provided the basis for developing a national set of indicators. And an indicator set is a great place to start because it provides the opportunity to agree on what are our data priorities. What are we going to work towards producing? And of that indicator set, we might end up with some that can't be produced yet, some that can be produced from existing data, and others that we need to do more work, such as change the way we collect data administratively, perhaps run a new survey. But a national indicator set, getting agreement on that is a huge step forward, and Bangladesh achieved that earlier, late last year when it published this protocol and guidelines. So drawing from those global frameworks, we started with 73 indicators that were through consultation processes, both in Bangladesh, but also at the regional level, were brought down to a shorter list of about 26 indicators that Bangladesh has agreed to produce on a regular basis that give us insight into these issues. So what are these indicators about? Well, they're about vulnerability, where the population is situated and who are more vulnerable, and that has a relationship with perhaps these characteristics I mentioned: age, youth, the older population, people with a disability. We also want to know about the loss of life, of course, the impact that disasters has on individuals, on families, on communities. So we need sex, age, and other disaggregated data on loss of life, on loss and damage to dwellings, and then also information about the support that's there for people in these situations. Are there safe spaces? Where are people going? And who is accessing those shelters and who isn't? Of course, in environmental issues around health, access to water, sanitation, these are big priorities as well. And that impact, both direct and indirect, on employment opportunities and education. So the process to achieve this guideline and protocol was conducted over about an 18-month period, and it was very consultative and participative. It was led by the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics with support by UN Women, and it involved consulting with a wide range of stakeholders, both across government and civil society, to develop this set of indicators. And then we have had recently a training of trainers to kind of launch this protocol and guidelines for implementation. Let me give an example of what the indicators include. Now, I mentioned that they are coming from these already agreed frameworks. This is not an additional set of statistics that have to be produced over and above what's already kind of required. They do draw from these existing commitments. So one is the SDG indicator 13.1.1, which is actually repeated across the SDG framework several times. And that is that we need to know the number of deaths, missing persons, and directly affected persons attributed to disasters per 100,000 population. We have those numbers, but what we don't have by many countries and systematically produced and published is to know that disaggregated by age, by sex, by location, by disability status, and by things like income level. And it's that disaggregation that we really need to see the picture and to combine that with the qualitative information to see how lives are being affected and what can be done to reduce the impact. There are a lot of indicators in this set. The document is published and available for you to access. Some more examples of things that are relevant to this nexus of gender and the environment. To know things about how much time people are spending on unpaid and domestic care work, and the differences between women and men. Also, the type of employment, whether women are concentrated in particular parts of the agricultural sector, industry, services, and where men are working, and if those sectors are more or less vulnerable. Also, this representation in decision making, proportion of seats in local government, in management positions, in the environment sector. These are all relevant measures. And just to wrap up, some lessons learned from this experience have been that in Bangladesh and in other countries in the Asia Pacific region, and I'm sure beyond, there is a really strong interest in integrating gender into statistics around climate change and around disaster management. And there are big challenges in doing so. One is that there are many stakeholders involved in tracking these issues, and harmonizing the way they collect and produce data is a big challenge to overcome. As I said, this new set of indicators provides a really good starting point, but now we have to move towards producing the data. And that is the road ahead now. And Bangladesh will be at the forefront of this because BBS, the Bureau of Statistics, will be piloting a new survey to see how they can collect data for the household level that will help produce some of these indicators. And then just the final point is, once the data are collected, that's the first step, but we really must make sure those data are analysed and published so that people can access and use that information. And with that, I thank you and look forward to the remainder of the panel. Thank you, Dilruba.
Thank you so very much, Jessica. I think you have set the scene, the importance, why we need, and what is the scenario overall with regards the climate, environment, and disaster issues and indicators and reporting. And thanks for also pointing out the incredible work that Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics and we were part of it, even women supported that, and you helped them doing to the fruition the task of producing protocol and guideline. So thank you, Jessica. I will now, our next panelist actually is Mr. Duke Ibn Amin from an NGO called JAGO NARI. And he actually has been working in the field of disaster risk reduction and climate change for long, and has been very closely engaged in post-disaster need assessment over the last few years with the Need Assessment Working Group, which is a group under the Humanitarian Coordination Task Team in Bangladesh. And so I would like to invite him to share his vast experience of grassroots level data collection and the challenges of collecting sex and age disaggregated data while doing the post-disaster need assessment. So over to Mr. Duke.
Thank you so much. Basically, I like to introduce myself. I'm Duke. Basically, I'm working at a local organization, and basically we are working at the coastal part of Bangladesh. And basically, a previous panelist, she said that the importance of the data, but at the same time, at the local level, we are basically collecting the data from the field level. So we have different challenges, even the coordination mechanism from national to local level. So next, I would like to request to change the slide. Next slide. Okay. Gender is in disaster need assessment and humanitarian response activities in Bangladesh, and this is basically conducted by need assessment working group. Basically, this need assessment working group is under control by HCTT, and any type of assessment like gap analysis, even RGA, and joint need assessment, all this collection, data collection is conducted by basically the need assessment working group in Bangladesh. And basically, this need assessment working group report basically help us to design the project proposal, even the response mechanism, even how prioritize the demand of the affected people. So basically, this is the importance from as a local organization, as a national organization, we need to utilize these data for the humanitarian response. Yes, please, next slide. Yes, this is the basically current practice of methodology, how we can design the data collection methodology like JNA. Basically, this is the most popular methods in Bangladesh. So first, we need to existing the demand and need assessment tools and methodologies were analyzed with the wider group of need assessment working group, and then basically utilize methodology by following census ratio, and then building consensus for age and ratio and real-time application. Basically, this the methodological process is conducted by basically the need assessment working group central level, and later stage we can go to the field. Please go to the next slide. Okay, this is very last year in 2019 there was a cyclone Bulbul. So there we have collected different data from JNA. So here is the summary of the data damage and disruption, like 57% in Khulna division and 44.6% in Borishal division, and girls are married of before age of 18 at a rate of 69, and Khulna division, and 74% is Satkira district. Basically, this is the percentage of the overall scenario of the means gender perspective, how percentage of girls are being married before age of 18. So then distress and needs means girls and adolescents, what kind of priority need for them during and after the disaster, like ministerial hygiene management, or wash related problems, or mental health. So that is the basically type of data we collected from the different assessment tools. Yeah, next slide please. Yeah, this is the another the monsoon flood in 19, that women and reproductive age would continue to require support such a dignity kit. And basically this type of recommendation came from the JNA report, and this was basically collected by the local NGO. And in previous, the INGOs was collaborating with the local NGOs to collecting the data, but very recently the NOG is formed a 3 regional groups with participation of local NGOs. Basically, in the future, local NGO, all the local NGOs will take the lead for taking the data collection, or for total assessment process will lead by the local organization. So we are staying in the very closely to the community, and we know what kind of priority need they have. Even we know the local language. Even we can talk to them very easily. Even they are very familiar with us, because we are working at the same place, so we can go in depth data collection. But there are a lot of challenges. So here, provision for dignity kids support or adolescent girls in temporary shelter, and re-engaging with stakeholders to strengthen protection and awareness. So this is the priority needs we find out in the monsoon flood. So go to the next slide. Okay, please. Yeah. Yeah, basically you see what types of information we need gender sensitive response, like how many boys and girls who are affected, how many women and girls who are affected. Even there was the data about the disabilities as well, even what kind of support they need, like pregnant women, even especially the pregnant woman and the newborn mother. So they have means different need from the other community. So we are basically focusing in JNA. We are basically focusing on different types of data, like if I say in the full phase of JNA, there is different clusters. So basically, cluster is prioritizing the questionnaire, what kind of set of information they need. So all the data is put in the questionnaire. So every cluster they can find their relevant information from the JNA. Okay, please let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is the basically challenges. The methodologies need to be tested because in after disaster, when triggered the JNA, there is very limited, because in 1 week or 1 week we need to complete the overall JNA process. So that time it was very difficult to test the methodology with the wider stakeholders, because that maybe last JNA there was more than 68 organization was participated for collecting the data. So testing the methodologies in the 68 organization, it was very difficult and time consuming. So that is the one of the biggest challenges for us. And the capacity development also, the personals are involved in damage and needs data collection and analysis for disaster are not particularly oriented on this issue, because the like currently we are going to train some local staffs. Those will participate in the JN in the coming future, but the problem is that sometimes they are migrated or shifting the organization. So it was a real challenge that we cannot find the trained staff in the real JNA, because they are involved in the another job or another organization. And the third part, there is no section for a disaggregated data section in the government SOS form and D form. SOS basically SOS and D form is the government form that was collected by the government, but there is very less chance to get the gender sensitive data. It was basically the overall damage information, like how many percentage of means agricultural land was damaged, how many roads or transport system were damaged. So that was the main priority for the SOS and D form. But we need to base the SOS form and D form because that is the very authentic and valid documents from the government. And this SOS and D form basically prepared by the very district and upazila level government officials. And then long questionnaire and community people cannot concentrate for long. Basically, there was more than 100 questionnaires, so it was taking more than 45 minutes to 1 hour. So keeping all the women's in the daytime for 1 hour is very difficult, and long questionnaire sometimes create some problems because they cannot concentrate in that time, because they are very busy in their livelihood or in their housekeeping, is cooking in the cooking time. And there is the limited time for data collection and compilation. Yes, previously I said that this overall time is the 7 days for JNA. So the process is like that. Previously centrally there was organized a virtual orientation for the all staffs, those will involve in the JNA. So it was like 3 to 4 hours orientation. So this is the basically main orientation. And after submitting the data, there was less chance to getting the feedback or again correcting the data from the field level. And last point, I mentioned that no budget for LNGO to conduct the JNA, because it was not necessary for the staff salary or nothing, or travel. But when we go to the field in the community level, basically there are some kids or women, they are coming. So if we can provide some basic foods or snacks, so it was good for us. We realized that it was very important to keep their concentration on the questionnaire. Please go to the next slide. Yeah, there is another bigger challenge for us, the lack of female trained staff for joint need assessment, because in practical scenario in the local level, this means gender balance is not particularly maintained in the staff level, because we have found very less female staff in the field level. More male staffs join in the data collection session. So this is the first time we are trained separately, only the female staffs for JNA, and limited access to risk women for more accurate and exact information during hazard situation. And there is the contribution for NOG, that NOG conducted dedicated assessment rapid gender analysis that said that in JNA there is another part of like rapid gender analysis. So we sometimes we also conducted the rapid gender analysis after disaster. So that helps us to find out more disaggregated data from this analysis. And that despite rapid gender analysis not incorporated gender segregated information, means that was the that in RGA, basically this RGA was more focused on the gender related information. So yeah, yeah, next slide please. Yeah, thank you from all from my side. Yeah, Dilruba Papa, over to you. Appa, we cannot hear you. Your microphone is muted.
I'm having the same problem. No, I was just saying that, you know, when we are working at the national level or regional level, we want disaggregated data, and we demand for it, and we produce all these tools and policies. But then when it is actually implemented at the field level, all these practicalities that you have talked about, not to mention the policy barriers, the structural barriers, and including people's capacity and commitment, not to mention commitment, it's really hard. It's not very simple at all. So thank you very much, Mr. Duke. I will now, actually, I'm really happy to invite Ms. Branwen Millar, the gender advisor of UNDRR of Asia Pacific Regional Office. And I would like to request her, Branwen, I would like to request you to kindly share an overview of the sex and age disaggregated data, and especially its significance for Sendai reporting, which the UNDRR is the custodian of it. So over to you, Branwen.
Thank you very much, Dilruba, and good afternoon, everyone. I just want to check you can see my screen, okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. As Dilruba says, my name is Branwen Millar, and I'm the Gender Advisor for UNDRR, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Today, I will be talking briefly about, sorry, just change the screen, briefly about disaggregated data for effective disaster risk management, particularly in the context of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And in particular, I'll mention some of the trends and challenges that we're seeing at the global level on reporting on the Sendai framework in terms of disaggregated data. So back to basics, what is disaggregated data? It's essentially data broken down into component parts. In the Sendai framework, targets A and B, which look at the number of deaths, missing persons, and people directly affected by disasters, specifically allowed for disaggregation by hazard, meaning we want to know whether someone is impacted by flooding or fire. By geography, we want to know where in the country the people that are affected are located. By sex, by age, by disability, and by income. And why is this important? Well, taking a case study from Cambodia, over a period of 5 years, they reported that 2,429 people died as a result of disasters, and they wanted to reduce the number of deaths. But in order to do so, they needed to know how people were dying. And it was really quite a surprise when they analyzed the data collected that the second highest hazard in terms of deaths was lightning strikes. So most people were dying by floods, but lightning strikes was unexpectedly high. Similarly, while the majority of the deaths were from floods, a programmatic policy response to reduce those deaths would be very different if we knew, for example, that 80% of those killed in the floods were women, or 75% were under the age of 15. These are not the statistics for Cambodia, just using them as an example. You would do things very differently to reduce the number of deaths if you had that information. In other words, you don't know what you don't know. The total number of deaths is actually not all that useful for policy making, but disaggregated data can be much more informative. Disaggregating loss data is of particular importance in understanding disaster risk, which is priority 1 of the Sendai framework. By collecting data associated with specific hazards or geographical footprints, countries can better understand their impact, which in turn can steer the development and implementation of efficient risk management and risk mitigation strategies. And secondly, disaggregating loss data is important in order to influence the decision-making process for disaster risk reduction. By collecting disaggregated disaster impact data, countries contribute to addressing the knowledge and capacity gaps and highlight avenues for resilience intervention. Furthermore, by involving women, older people, people living with disability, and Indigenous people in the design, formulation, and programming and monitoring of national and local disaster risk reduction strategies, countries assure inclusiveness and can secure their ownership and long-term sustainability in their disaster risk reduction implementation. The Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction supports an inclusive all-of-society approach to disaster risk reduction that encompasses core aspects of accessibility, non-discrimination, participation, and special attention to people disproportionately impacted by disasters, including women and girls, the poorest, children and youth, older persons, persons living with disabilities, and Indigenous groups. But we need the information about this. The Sendai framework also requires a multi-hazard approach and inclusive risk-informed decision-making based on the open exchange and dissemination of disaggregated data. It also promotes a broad and people-centered approach to disaster risk reduction and calls for the systematic collection and reporting on disaggregated data to bridge gaps in knowledge. Looking at the global level, when we analyze the trends in Sendai disaggregated data reported to date, we see that the level of data provided by member states varies tremendously. In general, disaggregated data by hazard and geography is pretty good. We know what hazards are causing disasters, and we know where in particular countries that impact is being felt. Disaggregated data by sex and age is limited, and disaggregated data by income and disability is very, very limited. Looking at what's happening at the global level, there are several emerging reasons for not reporting disaggregated data. The first is that governments are not confident in the data collected, so they don't report it. Secondly, sometimes they have the disaggregation, but the person doing the reporting doesn't know that they have it, or it's unclear who or where in the government this disaggregated data is kept. In some countries, we see that local authorities are unwilling to release data to the national level. And it's maybe also not a surprise that rushed or last-minute reporting of data means we see less disaggregation. People are just pushing to enter the totals that they have. We, of course, also see areas where there's a lack of capacity or resources to collect and report data. And there are significant data gaps in that the data is not being collected. Some countries have just started or are still coordinating the collection of data. And then the final point that we see in a number of countries is there's a reluctance from governments to use non-government partner collected data, even if that's the only data there is. Thankfully, knowing what the challenges are, we can identify a number of opportunities to improve reporting of disaggregated data. That includes practical support to countries to collect and coordinate gender data at the national level, including, like has been already discussed in the case of Bangladesh, linking national statistics offices with NGOs and other organizations. Leveraging support from CSOs and non-government organizations in collecting gender, age and disability specific data, particularly local data for national reporting purposes. For example, disabled persons organizations often do have good data on people living with disabilities, but if that's not being used at the global level, at the national level, it won't be reported into the system. We often advocate for best available data, encouraging member states to use data from CSOs where appropriate in order to report on the Sendai framework. And we also encourage the use of custom indicators, for example, reporting on third genders or injuries and deaths by different types of disabilities. Where we're able to encourage local collection of data and help support feeding that into the national level, we see the best results. And in establishing stronger linkages with national statistics offices is key. So without adequately disaggregated data, risk-informed disaster management is likely to be less effective. UNDRR is happy to provide advice and support to countries looking to strengthen disaggregated data in Sendai framework reporting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Branwen. That was really good. And getting the perspective of UNDRR. We are aware that UNDRR is pretty committed, is actually very committed to the gender cause. You know, UNDRR actually has been encouraging countries to, although there isn't any indicator, although there isn't any, you know, commitment being made for disaggregated information and data, but UNDRR has always been promoting and encouraging countries to report while doing Sendai reporting to provide the gender disaggregated and data and information. So thank you very much, Branwen. We will now come we have come to the last but not the least, our panelist, Ms. Inkar Kadyrzhanova, who is she's my dear colleague, but still haven't mastered pronouncing her name properly. Sorry about that, Inkar. But she is really a wonderful colleague and a great and a committed climate change and gender professional, has a long experience of working in development and climate change in UNDP and now in UN Women. And she's our gender and climate change advisor for this region, Asia Pacific Regional Office. And I would like to request her to give an overview of UN Women's work on gender statistics, particularly on climate change and disaster risks. Inkar, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dilruba. Thank you for your current words. And I feel that the more you pronounce my last name, the better you get. Maybe we should have a separate training session. I'll teach you, but you're getting better. Good afternoon, colleagues. It is really a pleasure and honor to be part of this important conference. And I would like to wish all the participants a great week. I have seen the program for the conference. You have an amazing lineup of speakers and topics. And I'm very happy that this event is taking place as it's planned, despite all the turbulence and changes and uncertainties that all of us are facing. So I'm going to talk about the UN Women's experience and some accumulated knowledge on integrating gender statistics and climate change and DRR policy space. And it is quite easy for me to speak after Jessica, who has provided a very detailed overview of progress in Bangladesh. And it seems that Bangladesh is really leading this work in Asia and the Pacific, and it has advanced quite significantly in the last 1 or 2 years in understanding the linkages between gender and climate change, and also translating this understanding in a very practical work, such as developing the thematic set of indicators and also preparing the protocol and the guidelines, and also having even more ambitious plans to apply this indicator set at the subnational level to collect the data at the sub-district level. But I would like to start my presentation by briefly recalling the root causes for gender inequality in Asia and the Pacific, and on the importance of statistics in monitoring and measuring the progress in advancing women's roles and advancing gender equality in general. We all know that there are these annual assessments that are done by UNDP and by the World Economic Forum. Each of these organizations have developed the Gender Equality Index and Gender Inequality Index, which are used on an annual basis to monitor the progress of each country across the globe in advancing the role of women in various sectors of our economy and social life. So both of those assessments, they agree that Asia and the Pacific is one of the regions which suffers from higher level of gender inequality compared to the rest of the world. And even though both indices point at the significant intra-regional differences when it comes to the level of gender inequality, they agree that Asia and the Pacific quite significantly lags behind many other parts of the world. And even the advanced economy from our region that are part of the OECD grouping of countries, such as Japan and Korea, for example, they still remain quite behind the gender equality indicators and parameters. So the reason behind the situation is that we still have the discriminatory gendered social norms and values that set glass ceilings or form the barriers to advancement of women and girls in many areas of life and professions. This is the region that suffers from the lowest rates of political representation at all levels of the government and also in the private sector. The legal infrastructure, legal structures and systems also do not reflect the required provisions that would place women in the similar place or on an equal footing with men. And this is the region that suffers from the highest levels of gender-based violence. And even though we know in many countries in our region there is political commitment and clear call for action in advancing the gender equality at the political level, there are often such barriers that are linked to data or actually lack of data that stop countries from progressing in this field. And from UN Women's analysis that was done at the global level on data availability, we learned that 20% of countries have data which is more recent than 2020, and only 16% of countries have data for 2 points in time. If we use the timeline from 2019 until 2030, that's the timeline that is used for monitoring the progress under the 2030 agenda. In Asia and the Pacific, only a quarter of the countries have legal provisions or specific laws that set the requirements for collecting gender statistics, or that have the elements which mandate the governments to collect sex disaggregated data. So, of course, the lack of data is one of the significant barriers that prevent the progress in creating informed and effective policies. And mostly when governments discuss the challenges, they agree on 3 specific challenges that in general apply to every government in our region. So the national statistical agencies are talking about the weak policy space or the lack of legal and financial provisions to collect sex disaggregated information. The NSOs also talk about the statistical and financial challenges that limit the production of gender statistics, and also the lack of access to data and limited capacity to use the data by policymakers to develop informed policies, has also repeatedly been mentioned as one of the challenges. So knowing this information, UN Women has adopted an approach to support the integration of gender statistics across the entire policy spectrum, but specifically also in the area of climate change and DRR. So UN Women is working in 3 areas. The first one is creating the enabling environment or promoting the supportive policy environment and addressing the institutional and financial constraints that are faced by the government. The second area is data production, where we more specifically work with the national statistical officers on monitoring the SDG progress. And the third area is addressing the gaps in data availability by providing the capacity building assistance, but also giving the open access to the data sets. Then I wanted to move to the SDG 5, and as you know, UN Women is the custodian agency for the SDG 5, and it is well recognized that without progress in gender equality and women's empowerment, the progress on SDG 2030 cannot be achieved. So it is important to mainstream gender in all of the SDGs and to understand the linkages between the gender and every element of the sustainable development framework. And a similar principle also applies to the importance of climate change. This is the global phenomena. It is called often as a threat multiplier. And without addressing the climate-related impacts, it is also not possible to advance in implementing the sustainable development goals. So understanding the cross-cutting nature of both the gender and climate change discourse, it is important to understand also what are the interlinkages and how relevant is the gender discussion for the environment or climate-related SDGs. So UN Women has conducted the analysis of the SDG framework and grouped the specific goals into 3 categories, and these are gender sensitive, gender sparse, and gender blind indicators. And as you can see, the gender sensitive are those SDGs where there are numerous indicators that are gender specific, and in particular there are 6 such SDGs. Then the second category is gender sparse. These are the goals which include relevance to gender, but it only appears in very few indicators in these goals. And then there is a third cluster of SDGs, which is called gender blind. And this is SDGs where there is no reference to gender at all or sex disaggregation. And all of these SDGs, or most of these SDGs, are related to environment, except for SDG 17, which is about partnerships. So, of course, this gap area calls for action and more in-depth assessment. So moving forward, what UN Women has done, in particular in Asia and the Pacific, we took as a basis the SDG indicators, and in particular the 93 environmental indicators that are already included in the SDG framework, compared them against the indicators on gender and environment that were developed by UNEP and IUCN, and then prepared a region-specific Asia and the Pacific set. And that set has been organized again in the 6 clusters. The set includes the cluster of indicators on land and biodiversity, on natural resources, climate change, sustainable consumption and production, the health and environmental decision making. So This work has been presented in a few pilot countries, including Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and also has been discussed at the regional and also global level with the relevant experts who are working on gender statistics. And what they have advised to keep looking and keep collecting additional indicators and information with the view to expand the indicator set and address the gap areas that have been identified by the statistical community. So those gap areas are presented on this slide, and they cover such elements as exposure to disaster, the conflict, gender-based violence, the importance of women as the traditional knowledge holders, the role of women as environmental conservationists, role of rural women in environmental leadership, the importance of small-scale industries and environment-related employment and livelihoods. And last point is about the sustainable consumption and production and importance of agricultural practices and organic farming. So UN Women continues working on refining this regional set of indicators on gender and environment, and further work would require at the expert level, but also at the level of the governments. But besides looking at this regional scale, and besides work on developing this, on fine-tuning the thematic set of indicators, we also have started working on a pilot basis on developing and applying the model questionnaire on gender and environment. And I'm happy to hear that this work has advanced quite significantly in Bangladesh with the involvement of Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics. But Bangladesh is not the only country that is interested in testing and piloting this work. Mongolia and Indonesia have also expressed interest in testing out the questionnaire and also using it in national or subnational data collection exercises. Some of this work was planned to be conducted in 2020, but unfortunately it has been delayed due to the COVID, but nevertheless, the government still remained committed to doing this work this year. So moving forward, what is next in the plans? We are going to summarize the accumulated experience from the region and share it at the global level, and also share it with the regional counterparts in other regional offices. Also, the work will continue on engaging the interagency expert group on gender statistics that is convening at the global level, and we will also continue working with our partner agencies in Asia and the Pacific. We plan to organize the regional consultations in order to share the experience and also to benefit from the expert knowledge from other expert organizations, think tanks, and research institutions. We also plan to expand the data collection and engage with more countries that could be interested in data in surveys. And the work will continue on publishing the existing data at the UN Women's Data Hub. And also the last point is about the connecting the specific UN Women's thematic programs that are dealing with gender statistics and other thematic priorities. And one such successful collaboration which has been going on in Asia and the Pacific is the collaboration between the Regional Empower Program and the Women Count Program of UN Women. This is all from my side. Yeah. I'm happy to answer to any questions if there are.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Inkar. That was a good overview of what UN Women is doing and is planning to do on gender statistics side and our specific achievements till date. So thank you very much, Inkar. Now we actually, before we go into open floor, I just wanted to confirm that our chair, the Honorable Secretary of the Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, has joined us.
Yes, could you hear me?
Yes,
yes,
we can hear you perfectly. Thank you so very much for joining, sir. We will go into open floor now. So if any participant wants to come, join or ask any question to the panelists or have any point to make at this point, please just raise your hands. I don't know whether you can, if you, yeah, I don't see any hands, which means nobody has raised their hands. No, there's one hand. Okay, I somehow can't seem to find who that person. Okay, Mahmoudul Hassan. So please, yeah.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for organizing this such innovative ideas of conference. I really appreciate. I am Mahmoudul Hassan, Monitoring and Evaluation Officer working with UNICEF Cox's Bazar. I would like to talk on the challenges of data collection and a few things that I would like to mention here also. Apart from that has mentioned already, I don't would like to repeat again those things. The another challenge that really in terms of disaggregated data collection, I have seen and observed in especially in Rohingya response and also the different flood and disaster situation, that lack of expert people and lack of using the technology. Although sometimes we initiated to use the technology to collect the data with the disaggregation, but when it goes to the field level, our field level staff is not that much compatible with the technology. That's one issue. Another, apart from the vice versa issue, is from the authority, who are collecting the data, they are not emphasizing that much to ensure the gender disaggregated data or disability disaggregated data. So even if the authority who are dealing with their data collection, if they can emphasize more on two issues that can they resolve these issues. One, that need to be ensured in SOPs, that if we mention in SOPs, we need to collect the data by three kinds of disaggregation: location disaggregation, gender disaggregation, disability disaggregation. Then everyone will be bound to do that if it's included in the SOP. Second on, we need to give some times to collect the data and building the capacity of the enumerators who will be the real on-ground worker to collect the data. That's the proposal from my side. Over to you, Dilruba.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mahmoudul Hassan. I think these are the kinds of things we really need to understand and hear from people like yourselves who are working in the field, the practical challenges. Also, Mr. Duke also pointed out some of those challenges in his presentation earlier. So there is another question in the chat box, which is about local stakeholders don't have capacity to collect data and analyze. Even though they want to strengthen their capacities, their resource is not enough. How can we promote localization and capacity building to strengthen disaggregated data? The question came from whom? I'm not sure here, because I got the question copied to me. No, there is. The question is coming from, oh no, it is from anonymous attendee. So somebody who doesn't want to give his or her name, that's fine. I think the question is about localization, and the question is about the local capacity, something that Mahmoudul Hassan and Duke have been pointing out to. And related to that is another question, which came from Wahida from UN Women. She pointed out that the local level actors, namely the NGOs and CSOs, they also have a lot of data since they are working at the grassroots level. They know the situation and they know about the, they have the information in their hands. Why are those information not being collected or adhered to? So the whole point is about localization, capacity, local actors, namely NGOs and CSOs. So I don't know whether any of you, like Jessica, Branwen, anybody wants to take up this point? Jessica, you wanna go?
Yeah, I can begin addressing the first question around this balancing localization and the capacity building needs that are there. And I think obviously this is an incredibly important strategic issue, because the quality of the data relies, 100% on the local people who are collecting that data. So I think the broad answer to the question is you achieve this very much step by step, but it does require obviously work from what we might say the bottom up, from things like making sure that people collecting data understand why it's being collected, why these elements are important. They've not just been put on a form because somebody had the bright idea, that they actually have a real purpose. So that might be something around, like anything from a 1 hour gender awareness raising session or whatever is relevant to understanding the key, the extreme importance of disaggregated data. And then I think also the people that collect those data also need to see that it is being used. And so there should be some feedback. And that doesn't happen very often. The data flows up to the central level, and even if it may be published, but I think the people that were involved in collecting that data need some acknowledgement that that information has flowed through to decision makers. This is what it looks like when aggregated together. And this is how it's been incredibly useful. And that's very motivating when that feedback can come to those people. So that's just a couple of ideas to contribute to the answer to that question. Very good question.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Jessica, about this feedback to the people who have been contributing or giving us the data. So this is about accountability, and we are not very good at that. I completely agree. Branwen, do you want to respond to this also?
Sure, maybe I'll just add one point building on Jessica's last point, which is absolutely, there needs to be more work to support the local level in collecting the data. But what we are seeing at the global level is that that data does exist in many places, but like Jessica says, for whatever reason, it is not being used. And so just to reiterate the importance of that feedback mechanism, and also, our approach with governments, which is to use the best available data that's disaggregated. It doesn't have to be official government data that has been validated. We have great resources amongst local organizations and civil society networks who have disaggregated data that we should be using and aggregating at the global level. Over.
Thank you, Branwen. I think the question is about validation. I mean, that's very important. I mean, the data are available at the local level, even CSOs and NGOs, as Wahida was saying, are there. But the question is about validation, the authenticity of data. I mean, that's very key. And when you are making a report from national level, when government reports something, it has to be a validated data. So that's where things get a bit tricky. There's another question from Mr. Kazi Abu Saleh. He's saying that we often see corruption in climate projects, which make women especially more vulnerable, and there is no provision of sex disaggregated data in projects planning and implementation. So what sort of measure the Bangladesh government have taken or could take? I think that's kind of question that actually MODMR and Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics would be the right people to answer. So I'll keep that question parked for the secretary when he makes his chair's comments to address if he can, if his time permits. So I'll go to the next question, which is coming from Dijen Mollik from BCAS. His question is, data collection and analysis are important issues, but data storage and assess sex and age disaggregated data are other critical issues in Bangladesh. How can we prepare effective MIS? Can be discussed in the forum. So it is about the data storage and the effective MIS system. So anybody who wants to take that up?
Dilruba, I can
yes,
start, and yeah. So I think the data storage is indeed a very important issue, but I believe that the problem is that in many governments that there is a lack of necessary infrastructure to store the data, and here I'm talking about the physical infrastructure, but also the management systems which clearly define who collects the data, how this data is transmitted to the storage, who is the custodian of the data, what's the quality assurance, what are the quality standards, how compatible is this data. And of course, the issue why this infrastructure is lacking is because it costs quite a lot of money to ensure the comprehensive, secure, modern, technologically upgraded system. And that often is one of the significant issues that many developing countries are struggling with. And also another issue is the data security. And this is the topic that is being discussed in social media and everywhere else. It's how important it is to not only to collect the data, but to be able to securely save the data and prevent potential data leakage. And of course, another issue is also the comparability of data. And earlier we talked about the importance of collecting data at the local level. And once data is collected from, like, this is usually a bottom-up process, it's the comparability and adherence, strict adherence to the data collection standards is of utmost importance. Otherwise, you know, we're collecting a lot of data which is impossible to aggregate. Yeah, this is just a few ideas.
Yeah, no, those are very important. I mean, we can. There are, you know, resource constraints also, but also even when we have resources, we have to understand all these perspectives to make the best use of the resources. There is another question from Farzana Yasmin, who says, if anyone wants to do research work on any disaggregated data, how one finds the specific indicators. I think that's, Jessica, your domain. Jessica, yeah.
Sure, thank you for the question. I see quite a connection actually between the question from Farzana and from Malik. It's about, you know, accessing data. And if you look at the data kind of production cycle, it's common to have several databases along the way. You know, you collect data in one form, then it needs to be processed and analysed in another, and then it needs to be disseminated in yet another database. And I mean, we all know technology is getting cheaper and it's becoming much more advanced, but I continue to be disappointed in how data are disseminated. We still have a long way to go as a statistical community to do a good job of this, and Fajana's question points to the fact that when we do disseminate data, it does need to be tailored for different audiences, and researchers are one very important audience. And in areas like, you know, the demographic and health survey, multiple indicator cluster survey, these long-standing globally managed survey programs, you can get access to microdata for research purposes under, you know, controlled conditions you need to apply. In this particular world of this nexus between, you know, gender and climate change and disasters, I don't think we have a good management information system at the moment. Branwen may say more about what UNDRR are doing in this space, but I know that there's we still have a long way to go. But the particular indicators I was talking about, there would be no database yet, but I think that's the vision for the future. So watch this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jessica. I have two more questions, and I think we actually have to draw at some point. The next question is from Ineza. I really don't know whether it's a he or she. I'm really sorry, Ineza. Ineza is from Rwanda, and the question is, how do we ensure that the data collected have the voice of the vulnerable communities, especially young girls and women, especially when the community aren't aware of the climate change or where women are still underrepresented in the climate decision table? A very good question. Anyone? Inkar, Branwen, anybody, any panelist who wants to take up that question? Okay. Yeah. Should I
can, Dilruba, I can start.
Yes.
I think the point here is about the involvement of stakeholders in data collection and engaging women and girls in data collection during the data collection process. I believe that it is important to give them assurance and safe space and discuss with them the purpose of the exercise, how the data is going to be shared, aggregated, where it goes to, what type of decisions will be informed about this data. It's, of course, is important to get the informed consent from women and girls about their participation in this data collection exercise. There are specific guidelines that are developed for designing the data collection and data sharing systems. And I believe that the enumerators manual, which Bangladesh, which PBS is working on, might include such elements on how to engage relevant stakeholders in this exercise.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think you have rightly pointed out that the protocol and guideline that the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics has developed under the National Resilience Program is actually trying to point out how we do get the sex and age disaggregated data. And you know, it's what happened so far has been that, you know, we say that we go to the community and collect the data from the community, and community, you have men and women there. And sometimes even I also did data collection in the field many a times. And I've seen that we go to the community and have meetings and you know, community discussions, and we have make sure that women are there. But the thing is, when you talk with the community and both men and women are there, women wouldn't open up. And that's the reality of the world. The women wouldn't open up. They would say, they would agree to whatever the men are saying. They would say, yeah, that's right, that's right. They wouldn't. And also, especially when you are talking about the risks, the safety and security issues, the health reproductive health issues, they would never talk about that in front of men. So we really have to thank you, Inkar, for pointing out that we really need to create an enabling environment. We need to give that space for the women and men, so for the women and girls to talk about their risks and their vulnerabilities. Very quickly, I have one hand raised from Shadeen Mannan from ICAD. You want to make your point, Shadeen?
Yes, thank you, Dilruba. In fact, I wanted to just flag in. In fact, it's not a question, more like a comment that you were just mentioning that when we go to collect data at the very local level, we have also seen that when you put a mixed group together with men and women, the context is entirely different than when you have separated groups. And even within the group of women, there are different dimensions. Like, for example, I went to collect data in Paiggacha Upazila of Khulna, which is very remote and all, but there are even hierarchies within women, like someone who can afford a fridge, a refrigerator, or maybe a bigger home. So someone else who just lives hand to mouth, maybe works as a day labor. There is a cultural norm among them that the comparatively people in the higher status try to dominate the entire group. So I think there is a need for us, or maybe the young researchers or young practitioners, to know how you need to create an enabling environment for all, so that you can get the most important data from everyone, and you need to make themselves counted. So I think you and women together with other organizations who are working on the issues of gender can also hold some workshops with these young researchers and practitioners on how to collect these data and how to be able to create enabling environments for women and girls to talk and share their thoughts.
Thank you very much, Shadeen. Yeah, you have raised this issue about intersectionality. Although this session is not about gender per se, it is about sex and age disaggregated data, but the issue is very, very important and pertinent, and that's about the intersectionality within the gender aspects. So I think we really need to close the discussion, open discussion. We are running out of time, and we really have to come to our chair, who is really, really busy, and I don't know how to thank him enough. But really, the Secretary of Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, Mr. Mohsin, he's truly a champion of gender equality in DRR, and he has been supporting UN Women to advance the cause wholeheartedly, I must say, which has been very evident for the last 4 years to us, while we have been designing and implementing the Joint National Resilience Program under his leadership. So I would request the chair, Mr. Mohsin, to give his remarks of the chair and close, closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilruba and others. Yes, good afternoon. It is a privilege for me to address this session, or to chair this session. It's very much, related, and very much, I think it's need to be discussed today. And disaggregated data for resilience building, and organized by UN Women. And this is the 7th Gobeshona conference. And I was very much involved with, I think, 5th, 6th Gobeshona conference, if I remember. The venue of maybe it was the North-South University or like this. And the discussion is very timely initiative, as it is comes during an extraordinary time when the world is struggling with the critical situation due to COVID pandemic. And also 2021 also being the first year of the decade of action for sustainable development, as declared by the UN Secretary General. So I would like to thank all of you for attending such an important discussion on agenda, race and disability disaggregated data, which is crucial for inclusive development. Especially thanks to UN Women to organize this session, And I would like to thank all the panelists, very much respected panelists, also moderator, to facilitate such a wonderful session. And I hope the consultation outcome would contribute towards the implementation of said data protocol into action for risk-informed, gender-responsive planning and implementation. Sorry for late join because I was in another meeting. And in the year of 1970, the cyclone, the death ratio between women and men was 14:1. In the cyclone 1991, it was 5:1. I want to mention again the ratio women and men. And nowadays, the ratio is approximately 1:1. This is due to the timely early warning dissemination, evacuation, ensuring women-friendly shelters, and more number of women volunteers in the cyclone preparedness programs. Now, there are 50% of the women volunteers out of 74,000 CPP volunteers who are playing very important role in preparedness, response, and rehabilitation as well. In addition, we have flood preparedness and urban volunteers as well. So this is the scenario, and many of you, you know all about this. The relevant government agencies collect disaster information and who needs to be well informed about the gender and data dissemination of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief customize the Sendai monitoring indicator. I want to mention customize, but accordingly Sendai framework, and train the core ministries in this regard through its National Resilience Program. And I am aware that the protocol and guideline has been published by the BBS, where 26 indicators have been identified in addressing different indicators of Sendai framework. And also I want to inform you that all the very recently, Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief has been awarded Right to Information Award 2020 and got first prize for the Information Ministry for its overall outstanding data management system. And here I want to mention that I think Ms. Inkar mentioned the SDG 5. She rightly pointed out about the SDG 5, as well as some of you mentioned the localization. This is very much important. We are working to have a common platform for gender, age, and disability disaggregated database that will have data analytics for ensuring the accuracy and transparency. That will allow to undertake efficient and effective planning for disaster risk reduction, including gender responsive and disability inclusive humanitarian response for building a resilience nation. You know all that role Bangladesh recognized as a role model of disaster management for the world in reducing the loss of lives and property in disasters, mostly on cyclones and floods. But still, we need to do a lot. We have updated the standing orders on disaster in 2019. That also considers SDGs, Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and other national agreement and charter. And you'll be happy to know that SDG included all the stakeholders, ensuring their effective participation, regardless gender, race, and ethnicity, disability, etc. Apart from, we have national plan for disaster management for 21 to 25. If you go through, you'll see that gender responsive and disability inclusive disaster risk management in activities and its operational strategies and monitoring system that focused on set data for planning and implementation. So we are trying our best. Even then, we have incorporated disaster risk management in all the development plans, including the 8 5-year plans, Delta plan, etc., etc. Nevertheless, to tackle the various disasters and negative impact of climate change, the different needs of men, women, and children should be addressed. Therefore, collecting disaggregated data is crucial to bring all the marginalized group of people in that development initiative and approaches. Especially for a gender responsive approach to DRR planning, gender-based differences need to be considered in the design of policy, strategy, and plan of disaster management. And to address this, we are developing our disaster risk management plan with inclusiveness through effective data management system. And with these few words, and I would like to conclude and wishing you all for a fruitful discussion and success of this conference. Stay well and cautious during this pandemic and keep your good working continuing. Thank you. Thank you again. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you so very much. That's very encouraging. And we know that MODMR, and it's great news that MODMR got the award for RTI for 2020. So congratulations for that. And so thank you all very much. We have come to the conclusion of this session. I see there are a few more questions, and I think no, I think we have, Jessica has already replied to some of this, one of those questions, and I did one. So thank you all very much. The panelists, a huge thanks to all of you for giving your time and thinking about the presentation and preparing it. Thank you so very much. And all the participants, sorry that we couldn't probably, because of time limitation, couldn't let all the questions come in and get your answers, but it was a very good discussion. Thank you all very much. And a huge thanks to the chair, Mr. Secretary, for giving us the time and the valuable comments and enriching our program. Thank you so very much. Thank you. And we'll share the transcripts and the recording with the participants shortly.